Let's get right to reaction and bring in our political panel now. Tom Parkin is principal with Impact Strategies and an NDP strategist. Shanice Scott is an account director at Hill and Knowlton Strategies and a Liberal strategist. And Jason Leader is president of Enterprise and a PC strategist. Thank you all for joining us tonight. So this is interesting, Tom. Younger Ontarians seem to be the most pessimistic about the future of this province. What do you make of this? Are voters tuned out?
I think there's a reason that younger voters are pessimistic because they're faced with the biggest problem of affordability that any generation has seen in a long time. The price of housing in this province has gone crazy. Rents go up and up and up. And this is exactly what's been allowed to happen under Liberals and Conservatives before them. We've got, the Liberals cut 1,600 nurses and they cut hospitals. The Conservatives cut more. And now the Conservative budget that was introduced a month ago is talking about another $2.7 billion of cuts. So, is there a reason that younger people are not so optimistic? Is there a reason that they like the NDP plan for dental and mental health care? Yeah, there is, because objectively the world is not as good for them as it was for people 15 or 25 years ago.
Shanice, what do you think? Why do you think younger voters in Ontario are disenfranchised?
Well, I think, we can see that millennials and Gen Z form the largest voting bloc. So it is quite interesting that they're not turning out to vote or as interested as they should be, since they can make the biggest difference. I think that says a lot about political parties and how they frame their messaging and how they try to reach their audience. I don't think any political party is doing enough to talk to this audience and meet them in the medium at which they receive information. I think when Gen Z and millennials are not being taken as serious in the voting scheme as they should be. They are facing affordability. They are facing a need for meaningful climate action. They are facing a lack of accessibility to housing. Where are the meaningful policies? And this is across the board from all parties. I think there needs to be more.
Jason, do you agree with that assessment? Is your party doing enough to take these voters seriously?
I think so. And I just want to go back to a couple of things that were said, because I generally agree. It doesn't surprise me that young people are feeling pretty pessimistic. I mean, they've been through a pretty tough couple of years. Let's say you're 20 years old, 10% of your life has been the pandemic the last couple of years, and it might be all you can really remember. You've got these really tough couple of years. You might be starting to come out of it. You're facing, let's say, some difficult situations. I will say though, the economy has picked up significantly. It's one of the reasons why Mr. Ford, I think, is doing very well in this campaign. There are serious affordability problems. There is no doubt about that in terms of housing and gas and all those kinds of things. The problem that the other two parties have in terms of if your issue is affordability, all you hear sort of Mr. Del Duca or Ms. Horvath talk about is higher taxes and that kind of thing. And so you've historically heard those kinds of parties sort of say, you should be paying more for gas. You should be paying more for those kinds of things. And it's a very difficult message to square. So it doesn't surprise me that people are pessimistic, but I will say I am seeing a little bit of optimism out there, because the economy there's help wanted signs everywhere. And I think people are starting to feel like maybe we're trying to get out of this pandemic.
Okay, Tom, we're going to move on here. Let's talk about some of the other numbers here. This latest poll, suggests the PCs have 37.3% support. Jason will be happy to hear that. The Liberals, it suggests, have 28% support, and the NDP have 23.2% support. So not a ton of movement here, and not as much has really changed since the beginning of the campaign. So how does your party block a Ford majority then, Tom?
Yeah, well, a couple of things have happened. Actually, there's been a bit of movement. This is the fourth in a series of polls that Nanos has done during this election campaign. And the Liberals have been steadily tracking down. They were a little over 30%, and so they've been drifting down through the election campaign. That's what we see in the Main Street polls and the other polls. But I think the most important thing for voters to understand is what the political parties understand, is that we don't elect, much to my chagrin, we don't elect governments or legislatures by popular vote. We elect them by seats. And there's 124 local races that are going to happen. And when you look at the seat projections done both by 338.com or by iPolitics, it's the Liberals who are in third. The Liberals continue to struggle. And it's the Democrats who are in second. So, you don't beat the number one person by voting for the number three. You beat them by voting for the next one down. And the New Democrats are sitting with the highest projected seat count at this time. So, Ms. Horvath comes to this election with 40 incumbents. Mr. Del Duca just 7. It just doesn't make any sense what Mr. Del Duca is proposing. And I'm sure his popularity won't be increased by his steak and spa scandal today. You got to take the one that's closest to Mr. Ford and back that group if that's what you want, and that's Andrew Horvath, the NDP.
So, Shanice, I'll let you weigh in here. The opposition parties, the NDP have been going after Doug Ford, that's for sure, but they've also been going after the Del Duca Liberals, and the Liberals have been doing the same. How much is that helping Doug Ford? Is that effective, do you think? And then, Jason, I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think if we just look at the NDP in the last 4 years, they had an opportunity to be an effective and strong opposition, and they were not. I think Ontarians have seen that they have not pushed the Ford government in a direction that is more progressive or fed into that. I think because they aren't the strong opposition, that's why you're seeing those kind of polling numbers trend more positively towards the Liberals. But I will say, for us to have that kind of opposition and for us to be able to combat some of the policies the Ford government has, we do need a little bit of an effort for both parties to stop attacking each other and to face their actual opponent. You heard Mr. Del Duca say it in the leaders debate. Every time Ms. Horvath would attack him, it would make Mr. Ford smile. We can't keep having that if we're going to be effective. But at the end of the day, there are some differences there. And I do think the Liberals have the best shot at being able to defeat the Ford government.
Jason, I'll get your thoughts because we haven't heard from you in a while, and just how this campaign has shaped up. Would you classify this as a sleepy campaign?
The sleepiest. I mean, the Seinfeld election so far, which, quite frankly, helps Doug Ford, right? You got an election about nothing. I'm not saying there's no issues out there, and Mr. Ford, Ms. Horvath, Mr. Del Duca, Mr. Schreiner, they're all trying to deal with these kinds of things. Truth is, people have seen a lot of government over the last couple of years, right? During the pandemic, we had daily news conferences from the Prime Minister and the Premier. I think one of the things that Mr. Ford's really, sort of been smart about is sort of getting out of your face over the last number of months, right? I think it's really smart strategy. Talk about a few simple things. Most people give him, whether some people give him an F for sure about the pandemic, but most people give him sort of B-, B+. You did okay, you did all right, and that's sort of working for him right now. They've kicked the tires on Mr. Del Duca. They haven't liked what they've saw, and he certainly hasn't taken off so far. Ms. Horvath, I mean, she's had a couple of chances at this. I mean, I've got a son going into university. He was in kindergarten, I think, when Ms. Horvath took over as NDP leader. So she's been around a while. They've had a chance to look at her, and they haven't, sort of said, hey, we want to put you in charge yet. So Mr. Ford, I think a really smart campaign, and I think, so far the other two just haven't caught any momentum in this campaign.
Tom, would you agree with that? A smart campaign by Doug Ford or a smarter campaign by Andrea Horvath?
Well, Mr. Ford's campaign is all based around the idea of trying to do as little as possible and avoid comment as much as possible. And the difficulty is, for the NDP is, we want to make his record the issue. The record of the Liberal and Conservative parties in this province is frankly atrocious. The Liberals cut healthcare, they cut education, they fired 1,600 nurses, they closed 600 schools. You remember the gas plant scandal, they privatized Ontario Hydro. That was a bad government that Mr. Del Duca was a leader in. And now we have had Ford, big cuts all over again. And again, he's tabled a budget that looks at $2.7 billion in more cuts. So where's that going to come from? We don't know. And, there's really only one leader in this race who's going to who can be relied on to stop Liberal and Conservative cuts and to fix healthcare and save thousands of dollars for people in dental care and mental health care. And that's Andrea Horvath. So she's going to keep leaning on that message hard. We saw that healthcare is a #1 issue. Affordability is very close as well. And she's got those cards, and the other two have a very poor record on both. It's absolutely fair game for her to be talking about Mr. Del Duca and his record. And if Mr. Del Duca thinks that he should somehow be shielded from that terrible record of the Wynne government that he was involved in, no, sir, that's not right.
Okay. Shanice, the polls suggest neither opposition parties really made a splash during this campaign, and we're only 9 days away from election night. So what do the Liberals have to do to change the narrative here?
Well, I think it's important that, remember, you're not electing necessarily the leader of the party. You have a lot of great local candidates. I think the Liberals need to focus on that. If you look at the Barry Springwater Oro Medonte candidate, Jeff Lehman, that's a really good local candidate you can push behind. It should really be a focus of what differentiates the Liberals and the NDP and why one is effective and one is not. Mr. Parkin kind of spoke about the Liberals' record. I would love to point to the NDP record, but they have not been elected. There isn't any hard decisions they've had to make. It's important that the Liberals show that we can govern and that we have governed and that we've done successful things. And then at the same time, we're rebuilding and building up those local candidates who will be really effective official opposition.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Shanice Scott, Tom Parkin, and Jason Leader, thanks so much for joining us tonight.